The Witch and the Definitely Dead Detective by Sadie Brent. Chapter 4. The Long Road to Stony Fork. Evie stood in her apartment doorway, surveying the now empty space. The echo of her footsteps on the bare hardwood floors felt oddly final, like the punctuation at the end of a long, meandering sentence. Every box, every piece of furniture had been whisked away by the movers just that morning, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and lemon that clung to the walls. Spinks sat by her feet, his leash clipped to a harness he clearly despised. His tail flicked with impatience as he watched her linger. "Well, buddy, this is it," Evie said, bending down to scratch his head. No turning back now. The words felt heavy in her mouth, as though saying them out loud made them irrevocable. With one last glance over her shoulder, she pulled the door shut and locked it, slipping the keys into a manila envelope marked landlord. As she descended the steps to the waiting rideshare, her heart thudded in her chest. The city was alive outside, horns blaring, people shouting, music spilling out from open windows, but it all felt distant, like she was already half a world away. The driver, a woman with bright blue braids and a friendly smile, helped her load her luggage. "Heading to the airport, huh?" the woman asked, as Evie and Spinks, in his carrier, settled into the back seat. "Yeah," Evie said, her voice tight. "Big move." The woman nodded knowingly. "I hear ya. Leaving's always tough, but sometimes you gotta shake things up, right?" Evie forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. As the car wove through the crowded streets, she found herself staring out the window, watching the city blur past. She'd lived here for nearly a decade, carving out a life that had crumbled in a matter of months. And now she was leaving it all behind. The airport was a hive of activity, chaotic and loud. Evie navigated the check-in counters and security lines with a growing sense of unease, clutching Spinks's carrier as though it were an anchor tethering her to reality. Spinks yowled indignantly as the TSA agents examined the carrier, drawing sympathetic looks from other travelers. "Sorry, Spinksy," Evie murmured, stroking the top of the carrier to soothe him. "Just a little longer." By the time she reached the gate, her nerves were frayed. She sank into one of the hard plastic seats, staring at the boarding sign for her flight to Charleston, West Virginia. The words felt foreign, almost surreal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Annie, safe travels, girl. Call me the second you get there, okay?" XO. Evie smiled faintly as she typed out a reply. "Will do. Thanks for everything, Annie." The boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, and Evie gathered her things, clutching Spinks's carrier as she made her way onto the plane. The cabin was cramped, the air thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and overly sweet coffee. She slid into her seat by the window, glancing outside as the tarmac workers bustled below. As the plane began to taxi, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. This was really happening. She was leaving behind everything she knew for a town she'd never seen, for a house she couldn't picture, for a life she couldn't imagine. The plane's engines roared to life, and Evie gripped the armrests as it lifted off the ground. She stared out the window, watching the city shrink beneath her until it was nothing but a patchwork of gray and green. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. The small regional airport in Charleston was a stark contrast to the bustling chaos she'd left behind. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with its carpeted floors and sleepy atmosphere. Evie stepped off the plane and into the terminal, clutching Spinks's carrier tightly. He was still sulking from the flight, his ears flattened in protest. A blue and gold painted sign reading "Welcome to West Virginia" hung over the entrance to baggage claim, flanked by potted ferns and a bright nature-inspired tourism display. Evie took a deep breath, the air feeling lighter here, fresher somehow. "Miss Hutchison?" Evie turned to see a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile holding a sign with her name on it. "Yes, that's me," Evie said, adjusting the carrier. "Freda Thomas, at your service," the woman said, extending a hand. "Mr. Simoneau sent me to fetch you. I hope your flight was smooth." "Smooth enough," Evie said, shaking Freda's hand. "Good to hear. Come on, let's get you to Stony Fork. It's about an hour's drive." They made their way to the parking lot, where a fiery red Dodge Challenger gleamed under the midday sun. "This is yours?" Evie asked, eyebrows raised. "Sure is," Freda said with a wink. "Lizzie used to call it my midlife crisis car, but I like to think of it as my freedom machine." hop in. The road to Stony Fork wound through dense forests and rolling hills, the kind of landscape Evie had only ever seen on postcards. The trees towered overhead, their leaves forming a lush canopy that dappled the road with sunlight. Frida kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing tidbits about the area. See that ridge over there? That's called Devil's Backbone. Legend has it there's buried treasure somewhere up there, though no one's ever found it. Evie smiled faintly, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She stared out the window, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her. You okay, hon? Frida asked, glancing at her. Yeah, Evie said quickly. Just a lot to take in, you know. Frida nodded. I get it. Moving's always a big adjustment, especially when you're heading somewhere new. But you'll find your footing. Stony Fork's a good place, full of good people. And Lizzie's house, well, let's just say you'll see why she loved it so much. The car crested a hill and Frida slowed down. There it is, she said, nodding toward the valley below. Evie leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Nestled in the heart of the valley was a small town, its streets lined with colorful buildings and shaded by towering oak trees. A river wound lazily through the town, glinting in the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. That's Stony Fork, Frida said. Your new home. Evie stared at the scene, a mix of awe and trepidation swirling in her chest. It looked like something out of a storybook, too perfect to be real. As they descended into the valley, the scent of fresh pine and wildflowers filled the air. Evie rolled down the window, letting the breeze wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was exactly where she needed to be.